The cool, damp air of a Bristol morning always carried with it a certain melancholic beauty, a stark contrast to the burning frustration I often carried in my chest. My name is Chloe Thorne, and at 29 years old, I'd learned that life, despite its picturesque moments, could be brutally unfair. And that unfairness, I'd discovered, was something I was no longer willing to tolerate, especially when it concerned my best friend Sarah. Sarah and I had been inseparable since primary school. We'd navigated awkward teenage years, celebrated university acceptances, and mourned heartbreaks side by side. Our bond was a tapestry woven with shared laughter, quiet confidences, and an unwavering loyalty that transcended mere friendship. She was the sister I never had. To see her reduced to a shadow of her vibrant self, dimmed by the actions of one man, was a pain I felt as acutely as if it were my own. His name was Liam Sterling. He had entered Sarah's life 3 years ago, a whirlwind of charm and ambition, cloaked in an aura of deceptive trustworthiness. He was handsome, undeniably charismatic, and possessed a silver tongue that could sweet-talk anyone into believing anything. Sarah, with her generous heart and earnest nature, had fallen deeply in love, convinced he was the one. I had seen glimpses of his possessiveness, his subtle manipulations, but Sarah, blinded by affection, had dismissed my concerns as overprotective fussing. I regret every moment I didn't push harder then. The betrayal itself was a slow, insidious burn, culminating in a devastating explosion. Sarah was a brilliant graphic designer, meticulously crafting a portfolio for a dream job at a prestigious advertising agency. She poured her soul into a concept for a major campaign, a vision that was both innovative and deeply personal. Liam, then working for a rival firm, had access to her files, her ideas, her entire creative process. He'd convinced her it was for constructive feedback, for support. Instead, he stole her work, rebranded it as his own, and presented it to his company, securing not only a massive promotion but also the very client Sarah had been hoping to impress. When Sarah discovered the theft, confronting him with the overwhelming evidence, his response was chilling. He simply smirked, denying everything, then twisted the narrative, claiming she was unstable and obsessed with his success. He even had the audacity to hint at intellectual property theft on her part, a monstrous lie that nearly destroyed her burgeoning career. The aftermath was catastrophic. Sarah lost her shot at the dream job, her reputation tarnished by Liam's insidious whispering campaign within the industry. The emotional toll was even heavier. She retreated, her bright spirit dimmed, her confidence shattered. For months, she barely left her flat, battling crippling anxiety and a profound sense of injustice. I watched her struggle, helpless, as Liam Sterling thrived, his career skyrocketing on the back of her stolen brilliance. He was a partner at a reputable digital marketing firm now, living a life of affluent ease in one of Clifton's most exclusive neighborhoods, completely untroubled by the ruin he had sown. The news hit me like a physical blow, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me as I scrolled through my LinkedIn feed one dreary Tuesday afternoon. Liam Sterling had just been appointed head of global campaigns at Apex Digital Solutions, a behemoth in the marketing world. There was a glowing profile photo of him, beaming, his smile radiating success and self-satisfaction. The accompanying article lauded his visionary leadership and unparalleled strategic acumen. My fingers tightened around my phone, knuckles turning white. Visionary? His vision was Sarah's. His acumen was her sweat and tears. Meanwhile, Sarah was still taking freelance jobs, struggling to rebuild her portfolio, working tirelessly in obscurity. She was still fighting the lingering whispers, the vague professional doubts that clung to her like a shroud. She was still seeing a therapist, trying to untangle the knot of betrayal and self-doubt Liam had woven into her psyche. The stark contrast between their two lives, one soaring, one painstakingly recovering, ripped through me. It wasn't just unfair, it was a grotesque mockery of justice. That was the moment. Looking at that smiling face, that audacious celebration of stolen success, something inside me snapped. The simmering anger, the quiet resentment, erupted into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to stand by any longer. Liam Sterling had to face consequences. He had to know that what he did was not forgotten, and it would not go unpunished. I would make sure of it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about restoring a modicum of justice to a world that had let a snake thrive. My first attempt, in hindsight, was embarrassingly naive, a desperate flailing rooted in frustration rather than strategy. It was a few weeks after seeing Liam's LinkedIn announcement, and I was still reeling, still fuming. I had stumbled upon a Reddit thread about legal and untraceable ways to annoy an ex, and among the countless outlandish suggestions, one stood out for its sheer absurdity: signing them up for Scientology emails. It seemed harmless enough, a minor irritation, a tiny pebble in the smooth pond of his complacent life. I found his email address easily enough through his company website, and with a mischievous grin, I navigated to the Church of Scientology's online contact form. I meticulously filled in his details, checking the box for receive updates and information. I even added a note in the comments section, something like, "Very interested in your programs for ambitious young professionals." I remember feeling a childish thrill, a fleeting sense of satisfaction. Take that, Liam. A few days later, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Her voice was tight, laced with a familiar weariness. "Chloe," she began, a sigh escaping her lips. Did you sign Liam up for anything recently? Like, unusual emails?" My heart plummeted. "What do you mean?" I feigned ignorance, a lump forming in my throat. "He just texted me," she continued, her voice rising slightly in exasperation. "He's absolutely furious. Apparently, he's been getting bombarded with emails from the Church of Scientology, and he thinks it's me. He said, 'I know it's you, Sarah. You're becoming unhinged. Leave me alone.'" My stomach clenched. I had wanted to hit him, to inconvenience him, not to drag Sarah back into his manipulative orbit. The thought of him, calm and collected, texting Sarah with such thinly veiled threats, accusing her of being unhinged, filled me with fresh rage. He was still trying to control her, to isolate her. "Sarah, I have no idea what you're talking about," I lied, hating myself for it, but knowing I couldn't admit my foolishness and expose her to more of his venom. Why would he think that? "Because he's Liam, Chloe. He always blames me for everything," she said, her voice trailing off. It made me feel sick. I thought I was finally moving on, and now he's just there again. The conversation ended quickly, Sarah clearly wanting to put the incident behind her. But for me, it was a turning point. My superficial attempt had not only failed to truly impact Liam, it had caused Sarah further distress, exactly what I wanted to avoid. My approach was amateurish, impulsive, and, most importantly, traceable. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. This wasn't a game of petty annoyances. It was a battle against a deeply unethical individual, and I needed to elevate my strategy. I knew then that whatever I did next had to be completely anonymous, utterly untraceable, and devastatingly effective. It had to be a masterstroke, not a clumsy poke. And it wouldn't be about irritating him. It would be about dismantling the carefully constructed facade of his success, revealing the rotten core beneath. The next few months became a blur of obsessive research. My evenings, once spent unwinding with a book or a television series, were now dedicated to a deep dive into the darker corners of the internet, into legal precedents, corporate ethics, and the art of information gathering. I absorbed everything I could find on digital footprints, anonymous communication, and the subtle ways information could be leaked without a clear source. I taught myself the basics of cybersecurity, understanding how data was stored, transmitted, and protected, and how it could be exploited. I delved into the world of public relations, learning how reputations were built, maintained, and, crucially, how they could be systematically unraveled. My laptop became my constant companion, its screen glowing late into the night as I devoured articles, listened to podcasts, and joined obscure forums dedicated to data privacy and corporate espionage. I wasn't just looking for ways to irritate Liam anymore. I was looking for ways to expose him, to reveal the truth of his character to the very people he sought to impress. This wasn't personal vendetta. It was a mission of justice, a quiet crusade to ensure that those who built their success on the destruction of others would not go unpunished. I saw myself not as an agent of revenge, but as a restorer of balance, a silent advocate for Sarah and anyone else who had suffered at the hands of people like Liam. This wasn't about me. It was about a principle. My research led me down fascinating, sometimes disturbing, rabbit holes. I learned about whistleblowing protocols, the vulnerabilities in corporate compliance structures, and the immense power of aggregated, verified information. I realized that Liam's true Achilles heel wasn't his public image in isolation, but the foundations upon which that image was built. His professional integrity, his company's reputation, and his relationships with key clients and colleagues. He was a professional, operating in a highly competitive and image-conscious industry. Any sustained damage to his perceived integrity would be catastrophic. I started building a comprehensive profile of Liam Sterling. I moved far beyond his phone number and email address. I delved into public records, archived news articles, and professional databases. I studied his company's corporate structure, its major clients, its financial reports, and its internal policies. I scoured social media, not just his, but that of his colleagues, his industry peers, and his former associates. I learned about his professional network, his mentors, and his potential rivals. I wasn't just looking for dirt. I was looking for patterns, for systemic weaknesses, for the cracks in his carefully constructed edifice. I identified the specific, sensitive information Sarah had worked on, the intellectual property Liam had stolen. I found the public-facing versions of his campaigns, comparing them meticulously to Sarah's original, hidden drafts. The similarities were undeniable, a smoking gun for anyone willing to look closely enough. But the challenge was making someone look and making them believe, without revealing my hand. I began to understand that the key was not just exposing Liam, but doing so in a way that forced his own company or a regulatory body to investigate him. It had to be an internal unraveling, not an external attack that could be easily dismissed as the bitter rantings of a disgruntled former acquaintance. My actions had to appear as a legitimate, objective exposure of misconduct, rather than a vengeful act. One evening, as rain lashed against my windowpane, I finally articulated my core strategy. I would not directly confront Liam. Instead, I would systematically gather and present irrefutable evidence of his professional malfeasance, focusing on the intellectual property theft from Sarah to the relevant authorities and influential figures within his company, all while remaining completely anonymous. The information would be delivered in a way that made it impossible to ignore, forcing an internal inquiry. The objective wasn't just to get him fired. It was to expose a pattern of unethical behavior that would prevent him from simply moving on to another company and repeating his predatory actions. It was about creating a ripple effect that would safeguard others from similar betrayals. My first concrete step was deceptively simple, yet utterly crucial for anonymity. I created a new, untraceable digital identity, a phantom persona built from scratch. This involved using virtual private networks, encrypted email services, and open-source intelligence tools to create a completely separate digital footprint. I purchased a burner phone, paid for in cash from a nondescript convenience store miles from my home. This phone would be used exclusively for this purpose, never linked to my personal devices or accounts. This anonymous identity would be my conduit, my ghost in the machine, through which I would begin to carefully, patiently, and without a trace, dismantle Liam Sterling's carefully constructed empire of lies. The game had truly begun, and this time, there would be no mistakes. The scent of over-steeped Earl Grey tea filled my tiny Bristol flat, a scent that usually calmed me, but not today. I stared at my laptop screen, the glowing email from Mark, Sarah's ex, a beacon of his unearned audacity. "Tell your friend to stop," it read, referring to the anonymous Scientology emails I had signed him up for. My jaw tightened. He thought it was Sarah, my kind, gentle Sarah, who wouldn't hurt a fly even if that fly had crushed her spirit and left her shattered. Right, I muttered to myself, pushing the mug away. This isn't working. This is petty. This is exactly what he wants us to do. The rush of a minor, anonymous inconvenience had worn off, replaced by a bitter taste of failure. It hadn't made him feel guilt. It had just confirmed his self-importance, solidifying his twisted narrative that Sarah was the vindictive one. And it had put Sarah in his crosshairs again, even if just for a baseless accusation. Later that week, I met Sarah at our favorite coffee shop, The Daily Grind, the clatter of porcelain and the hum of conversation doing little to soothe my agitation. He texted me again, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper as she stirred her latte. Asked if I was stalking him. Can you believe the nerve? I clenched my hands under the table. Sarah, I am so sorry. That was my fault. I thought it would just be a laugh, a minor annoyance. She looked up, her eyes wide. Chloe, what did you do? I signed him up for a few things, I confessed, feeling a flush creep up my neck. Scientology, some niche mail-order catalogs. Silly stuff. Sarah blinked, then a faint smile touched her lips. You did that. She actually let out a small, surprised laugh. Well, it didn't work. He's more paranoid than annoyed. Exactly, I said, feeling a pang of frustration. And now he suspects you. This isn't helping. This isn't making him face what he did. It's just making him think we're childish. I leaned forward, my voice dropping. I'm done with the small stuff. This needs to be bigger. Not for revenge, not just for us, but because people like him shouldn't get away with it. Sarah's smile faded. Chloe, please. Just let it go. It's not worth it. He's living a charmed life, Sarah. A successful life, as you put it, working at a nice company, with no guilt for tearing you apart, I argued, the anger bubbling up. That's not right. He's Satan's spawn, and he's thriving. That's a bigger problem than just our problem. She just shook her head, but I could see the flicker of a question in her eyes, a hint of something deeper. I didn't press. I knew she was tired of the fight, but I wasn't. This wasn't about her fighting anymore. This was about me. The next few weeks became a blur of late nights and endless research. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet reflection, transformed into a war room. I started with Mark's company, Viridian Solutions. A quick Google search confirmed it was an environmental consulting firm. On the surface, a beacon of sustainability. Beneath, I suspected, lay something far less pristine. My initial approach wasn't to target Mark directly, but to understand the ecosystem he thrived in. I devoured every publicly available document on Viridian Solutions. Their annual reports, press releases, client lists, even local news articles mentioning their projects. I scoured environmental databases, looking for discrepancies, complaints, or anything that hinted at a conflict of interest. The deeper I dug, the more I noticed a pattern. Viridian Solutions seemed to specialize in environmental impact assessments for large industrial developments, particularly those in contentious areas, wetlands, rural communities, or near sensitive ecosystems. And an uncomfortable number of these assessments, I observed, consistently concluded that the environmental impact would be negligible or manageable, even when local community groups voiced significant concerns. This wasn't just a company doing its job. It felt like a company enabling others to cut corners. Mark, I knew, was a senior consultant. That meant he was directly involved in these assessments, a key figure in the very process that determined whether a project was safe for the environment or not. One particular project caught my eye, a proposed industrial park expansion on the outskirts of Bristol, bordering a small, historically significant woodland and a low-income residential area. The local community council had fiercely opposed it, citing fears of increased air pollution, water runoff, and noise. Viridian Solutions had performed the environmental impact assessment and, unsurprisingly, had given it a clean bill of health. I cross-referenced their report with independent studies from local universities and environmental charities, as well as archived news reports from 5 years ago when the project was first proposed. The discrepancies were glaring. Viridian's report downplayed the presence of rare flora and fauna in the woodland, minimized the potential for increased traffic congestion, and, most alarmingly, seemed to entirely omit data on the proximity of a known, aging wastewater treatment plant nearby that was already at capacity. The more I read, the colder I felt. This wasn't just about Mark being an awful ex. This was about Mark and his company being complicit in potentially harming a community and an irreplaceable ecosystem, all for profit. His name, I discovered, was right there on the executive summary of the Viridian report for the industrial park project. It was a signature of presumed expertise, but to me, it was a brand of deceit. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. This was the leverage. This wasn't petty. This was a truth that needed to come out, a wrong that needed to be righted for reasons far beyond my personal animosity towards Mark. This was a moment of decision, a point of no return. Was I doing this for Sarah, or for the greater good? The line blurred, and honestly, I didn't care. The injustice was too stark to ignore. A wave of doubt washed over me, cold and unsettling. What if I was wrong? What if my emotions were clouding my judgment? Was I becoming obsessed? The thought of turning into a person consumed by bitterness, mirroring the very darkness I saw in Mark, was a chilling one. I paused, took a deep breath, and walked away from the screen. I spent an hour just staring out my window at the gray Bristol sky, watching the rain begin to fall. This wasn't about petty revenge anymore. This was about accountability. This was about exposing a truth that had real-world consequences for real people. If I messed it up, the truth might never come out, and Mark and Viridian Solutions would continue their harmful practices unchecked. The weight of that responsibility was immense, far heavier than any personal vendetta. But then another thought solidified. If I didn't act, who would? The community groups had tried and failed. Regulatory bodies seemed slow to respond. This information, meticulously gathered, might be the key. My anger at Mark was the spark. Yes, but the fuel was now a genuine concern for justice. I decided firmly that my actions would be measured, strategic, and purely focused on the evidence. My feelings for Mark, while potent, would be a contained fire, not the engine driving the train. The truth, not personal vengeance, would be the weapon. With a renewed sense of purpose, I returned to my desk, not to plot mischief, but to plan an exposition. I began researching whistleblower protections, the processes for submitting anonymous tips to regulatory bodies, and the ethics of investigative journalism. My goal was to compile an unassailable, meticulously documented dossier, one that even the most skeptical reporter or regulator couldn't ignore. I compiled everything. Scanned copies of Viridian's misleading reports, cross-referenced with independent scientific data, satellite imagery showing the environmental impact of the existing industrial structures, and even anonymous testimonials from residents I found online forums about increased respiratory issues in the area. I ensured that Mark's involvement was highlighted purely through his official capacity on the reports, removing any personal commentary or emotional language. This wasn't a hit piece. It was a factual exposé. I decided on a well-respected local investigative news outlet in Bristol, known for its tenacious environmental reporting. They had a secure, anonymous tip line and a reputation for thorough verification. I created a new, untraceable email account on a public computer at the library, using a virtual private network for an added layer of anonymity. I didn't want any digital breadcrumbs leading back to me. I spent hours meticulously crafting the email, attaching the compressed, encrypted files. The subject line was succinct, urgent, environmental impact assessment discrepancies, Viridian Solutions, and industrial park project. The body text was formal, direct, and devoid of emotion, simply laying out the facts and urging them to investigate. The day I sent it, my hands were surprisingly steady. There was no theatrical flourish. No celebratory feeling, just a quiet sense of finality. I closed the laptop, walked away from the public computer, and returned to my own life. All I could do now was wait. The wait was agonizing. Days turned into a week, then two. I monitored the news religiously, every local bulletin, every environmental blog. I kept an eye on Viridian Solutions' website, their social media. Nothing. Had I made a mistake? Had my efforts been in vain? Doubt not at me. Then, almost 3 weeks later, I saw it. A headline on the local news site, bold and uncompromising, Viridian Solutions under fire, questions arise over Bristol Industrial Park environmental assessment. My breath hitched. The article detailed everything I had uncovered, citing anonymous sources who had provided extensive, compelling documentation. It exposed how Viridian Solutions had allegedly downplayed critical environmental risks and overlooked key data in their assessment of the industrial park expansion. Mark's name was mentioned, not as a villain, but as a senior consultant whose signature appeared on the controversial reports. The article even included quotes from local residents, their long-ignored concerns finally brought into the light. The public outcry was immediate. Within days, local environmental groups mobilized, demanding a full, independent review of the project. Regulatory bodies announced preliminary investigations into Viridian Solutions practices. Shares in Viridian Solutions took a noticeable dip. I saw a brief news snippet featuring a harried-looking Mark Thorne, surrounded by reporters as he entered the Viridian Solutions office. He looked pale, defensive, his usual arrogant swagger replaced by a pinched anxiety. He offered a quick, no comment, before disappearing behind the glass doors. He wasn't living a peaceful life anymore. He was facing the consequences of his actions, not because of a petty prank, but because the truth, systematically revealed, had forced him to. The satisfaction wasn't the burning, vengeful kind I might have once imagined. It was a quiet, deep understanding of justice. This wasn't about me or Sarah anymore. This was about holding powerful entities accountable. It was about exposing truth for the greater good. My focus had shifted. What started as a personal quest for retribution had evolved into something far more profound, a commitment to shining a light on injustice, one meticulous detail at a time. The real work, I realized, was just beginning.